Africa. I'll never forget the trip to Africa with Clark Terry.
Oh, I shall always remember that too.
Yeah.
It was marvelous. Great experience.
One experience I must talk to you about, because to me it was thrilling and very, the dichotomy of it just killed me. The Africans decided in Lagos, after we did our concert, that they were going to entertain us with the African orchestra.
At the Grinner?
Right. In Lagos, yeah. And well, it wasn't the Grinner. Wasn't the Grinner. No, they were just going to entertain us. They were going to play for us, the Africans.
Oh, I see. Oh, yeah.
And who was the kid that you had out of Westwood on drums?
His name was Adams.
Adams, yeah.
Yeah.
Here we were in Africa, and I was in charge. And I went up to the microphone and asked if Mr. Adams would come up and please play with the Africans. I said, only in Africa.
Now I know what you
They couldn't find their drummer.
You got to remind me.
And we had...
This was a Caucasian drummer we had.
You had what? Go ahead.
Yeah. No, the drummer we had, David Adams, was a Caucasian drummer. He was the only Caucasian in the whole entourage. You got to tell him, say, this is funny.
Yeah, and the Africans would go entertain us, but they couldn't find a drummer. So they wanted to know if they could borrow ours. So here we were in Africa, and they were entertaining us. Only they had a white drummer. I was very, very happy. And the man there who was the ambassador, I think he was, to Lagos, right?
Yeah.
When we did the television thing, he asked if he could sit in. Remember?
Yeah.
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 Play a trumpet.
But the title of that was, he's not our regular drummer.
When we got there, that was the cutest thing in the world. We checked into a Holiday Inn, as I remember. And everybody got jugs of water, Evian water. And we went upstairs and turned on the tap. And would you like to tell them what happened for the next day or so?
Yep. It's a situation where one time during 24 hours, one period, for about maybe an hour, hour and a half, they turned on the water. And you had to wait by that time to make sure that you brush your teeth, shave, took a bath, flush the toilet, do everything all in this short period of time, because once that stopped, you're off till the next 24 hours when it comes back again. A drink of water, brush your teeth, whatever, didn't matter. And there's no water whatsoever until that one period rolled around again. And that was kind of a trying situation, wasn't it? But we managed, didn't we?
Yeah, we survived it. In fact, I mean, your great sense of humor, I mean, came in very handy. He was writing and he wrote to his family. Clark.
They use it officially too, you know?
I know that. I noticed that they did in the journal that he was writing. He said, he wrote to his family, he said, just call me Chief Funky Butt.
What else?
Well, this is, in music, I mean, people don't know it all the time. But if you hear, tabba-doo, doo-doo-da, that's
Buddy Boulder.
Yeah. Funky Butt, take it away. Yeah, happy times. I remember you playing in St. Louis years ago. At, what's that club?
Club Plantation.
Club Plantation with Hudson's band, wasn't it?
Yeah, George Hudson's
George
band.
Hudson's
and you
band.
came through there with Gerald Wilson's band, I think, didn't you?
We came through with Gerald Wilson.
Yeah.
We were Elephants, Gerald.
We used to play softball in the park every morning. We get off like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
I wasn't in shape.
Yeah, you were in shape. You were hitting
in
home runs till you
until I pulled a muscle.
Made a mistake there at the plate. And relatively speaking, about the size as we are now, he was about that much more bigger than me.
I wasn't. I was.
I mean, we were both small, but you were heavier.
170.
You were heavier than I was at the
75.
time. I was about 130 or 25.
You were?
Yeah.
I didn't realize you were that small.
I was a little bit. I was thin enough to ride a rooster. And Joe hurt I don't know, is that the story you were about to tell? When you swung at the plate and swung the ball at the plate and missed?
And crumpled up at the plate.
And I picked him up and carried him
In his arms. Yeah, and carried me to his car.
I thought about that Father Flanagan thing.
Yeah, he ain't my brother. He just, no, he ain't my brother. He just heavy. Yeah. Yeah, and then took me to the hotel and called the doctor. And the doctor came and taped me up. And I went on back to work that afternoon.
Yeah.
I mean, no, well, I took care of work that afternoon. Then I went on back to work that night.
Yeah. We've been brothers ever since. Well, we were tight long before that even.
Oh, yeah. I was thinking about, long before that, I came through there with, 43 I came through the first time with Lionel Hampton.
Mm-hmm.
And then tell us about this trumpet player who played lead and also was the best soloist that they had, which you were doing it all about that.
Oh, with George Hudson's band?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You were doing the whole thing. I sat backstage. You didn't know I was back there in the kitchen.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't allow us out front.
That's right. If you were back there, you had to be in the kitchen.
I wanted to hear the band.
You came up the iron stairs in the back.
You mean you don't want me to look hip? I had it up, but on purpose. That's the look. The look is, yeah. You don't know how to wear the. You know what? You say what? You know why white guys play golf? So they can dress like black guys. Yeah, this is it. Like it's here.
Yeah.
See? Can you see it in there? Is it cool now?
If you went like that,
Is it cool now, baby?
oh, it's cool.
Yeah.
All right, solid.
Yeah.
They turn it down, and it's little Lord Fauntleroy.
Yeah. Then that would be two hip.
Yeah.
And then two hips are very uncomfortable.
Two hips.
Yeah.
Two hips. What is it there? Two hips or turnips?
Two hips, then rosebud or rhubarbs.
Yeah.
That was a very, very swinging tune that Ray Nance used to do.
Yeah.
The Ellington band.
Yeah.
Champagne or just plain stew.
Yeah.
Tell me, dream face. What am I to do?
What am I to you? Yeah.
What am I to you? Yeah.
What am I to you?
Yeah.
Jack Sheldon has that out now.
Does he?
Yeah. With a good arrangement.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's got excellent concept. Yeah. I was thinking about it even before then and also you were in the Navy during the war.
Yeah. 42 to 45. Yeah.
Great Navy band.
Yeah, sure was a good band.
Did you go to Great Lakes at all?
Yeah, that's where we were.
That's where
for
you
the
were?
whole period.
Well, you were up there with Gerald Wilson.
Gerald Wilson, Willie Smith, Rox McConnell, Big George Matthews, Hobart Dawson, Ernie Wilkins, Jimmy Wilkins, Jimmy Kennedy, the whole smear, man. Paul Campbell, Soupy, yeah. We had quite a motley crew there.
But it was a great band. Because you came to Chicago and played at the Grant Park.
Right.
I saw you there.
We used to do a lot of things in Chicago.
And you would broadcast from Great Lakes.
Right.
And had the greatest football team in the world.
Yeah, we had Buddy Young and Motley.
Marion Motley. And Paul Brown was the coach.
Yeah, right.
You know, that was the first time I heard of him. I didn't hear of him while he was at Massillon, Ohio.
Yeah.
But I heard him when he was coaching up there.
Also had great baseball. He was Schoolboy Roll and then Robin pitcher?
Roberts.
Robin Roberts, yeah.
Yeah, well, that was before.
That was
before Robinson. So I knew more about the Negro Leagues.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Now I follow them very closely because of the Pittsburgh Courier, the Chicago Defender, and the black publications that I read voraciously, as I read the white publications as well. You know? And the Cubs were perennial losers. And the White Sox were just as bad over there, and the Yankee.
Well, the White Sox, that's when they had Orestes Minoso, wasn't it?
No, I'm talking about before that.
Before that?
I'm talking about during the war.
Oh, during the war period. Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't until 1946 that Jackie Robinson became a Dodger, and they began to draft fellows from the Negro Leagues.
Yeah, well, you know, that's when we had two navies. You know, we had a white navy and a black navy. You remember that?
No, I don't.
Well, our camp was Camp Robert Smalls, and all of the black enlisted men in the naval services were relegated to this camp, and there were 6 other camps, Caucasian camps, you know. So we were all there in our little space, you know, our little Camp Robert Smalls, and we had a commander who was a banjo player, was the most notorious banjo player of that era, by the name of Eddie Peabody.
Commander Peabody.
Commander Peabody.
Eddie Peabody, yeah.
Yeah, now he
could play the
Oh yeah, he could play, but he was still sort of antebellum in those days. And he had the grand idea that since he was there surrounded by all these black musicians, that it would be a good idea to start a minstrel. You know, so
God.
He wanted us to.
He was going to start a minstrel.
Yeah, he wanted to start a minstrel. And we rebelled almost to the point where we were going to be charged. What is that charge? Treason or
treason?
Oh yeah,
or mutiny.
Mutiny or whatever.
Mutiny or whatever.
He wanted us to do this. And
oh yeah.
all this, you know, with the
Mr. Interlocutor.
with the white gloves and the big bow tie.
And next came blackface.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Well, we refused to do it.
Eddie Cantor and the guys were still doing it. Jolts and them.
Yeah.
They were still doing that kind of thing, you know, like.
It was funny. We had one commander who literally hated black people. He came through the barracks every night to make sure that everything was in law and order. Anything that was out of order was referred to as a holiday. If there's a speck on the window, said, "Get that holiday off of there." You know, if there's dust on the floor, that's a holiday. If your boots weren't laced right, it's a holiday, you know. So you come through looking for holidays. And any little thing that would go wrong in the middle of the night, they say, "All right, hit the deck." Everybody had to get up, go out on the gridiron and march, you know. So one time he was an ex-pug, you know, so he was so into what he was doing, and he hated black people so much, so he made the mistake of choosing one of the guys to pick him out to say, he's a big dude, you know, so he thought he could just kick him around. So he didn't realize that this cat was one of Joe Lewis's sparring partners. So he said, "Carl, you think you're tough? Come on over here. Put the gloves on with me." And he said, "Yes, sir." He put the gloves on with him, and he started. This cat said, and the whole bag said, "Ah!" We poured water on him.
Oh God. How we won the war.
So we won the war. But we call it the Battle of Great Lakes.
Oh. Yeah.
Sometimes he would make us go out in the middle of the night to march just for the heck of it, because his way of getting back at us. And we had figured up a little way to escape. You know, we walked at the end of the gridiron. There's a little hole we cut in the fence. So every trip around, one or two would this way. And go up to Waukegan.
Oh my God.
And have a great time. But by the time that he was finished marching us around, you'd end up with maybe 16 troops, 18, you know, out of the whole barracks.
I think you should write that story sometime, man. I mean, Daddy, what did you do in the war? You understand? Yeah, I fought prejudiced hunkies. That's what I did.
Fought the Battle of Great Lakes.
Battle of Great Lakes, you know. But I'll tell you something. I got a story for you, though.
What's that?
It's funny how experiences and things that you do come to you. I was working at a place called the Silhouette, which was on Howard Street. It was the boundary, the northern boundary between Evanston and Chicago, Illinois. And the silhouette, all of the naval officers from Glenview Naval Air Station used to come in there all the time.
Yeah.
And occasionally some merchant seamen would come in.
Yeah.
But the Glenview kids, they were in all the time. And there was one of the young red-haired Irishmen. He used to sit there at the bar and his head would be down like this. And he'd listen to what we were doing. It was with Adam Lambert and the 6 brown dots, as I remember, the 5 brown dots or something. And we'd finish and he'd take his drink and have a drink and he'd look up. You know, nod his head. That's all he'd do. He never was demonstrative or anything. Some of the guys during the break would go back over the dance floor and they would practice diving. They would, you know, dive in the air and crash on their stomachs or however they wanted to land, you know. But he wasn't very demonstrative at all. He was very cool. So one day I walked in the club, one night rather, I walked in the club after I'd been out to get a bite to eat. And I heard this noise behind me and I turned and I looked and there was a guy on the floor. And there was another one there, and he hit this one too, and floored him. And I dropped my coat on the floor, and nobody bothered me, so I couldn't hit anybody, you know. I was over there practically by myself, that far north. So I found out later what had happened. These 2 young men are from Mississippi. And when I walked in, one of them said, "What is that Nigerian doing in this white man's place?" You know? Yeah. Of course, they didn't have enough education to know how to say the word Nigeria. And so, yeah.
Spelled similarly.
Yeah, it all looks the same to them. You know? Oh, yeah. You know? You know, and he said, "What's he doing in this place?" And this kid, who I found out later on was a middleweight boxing champion of the fleet, as well as a naval flyer, got up and floored both of them and sat down. Next thing I know, somebody came and drugged them out, you know. And I said, "Okay, all right." So, I mean, all of them didn't hate us. We had the respect of quite a few as well along the way. Young men.
You know, Joe, I think that some of the people who are going to be looking and listening to this wouldn't believe some of the stories that we could tell them about the bigotry and things that we have had to endure in our lifetime in traveling in the South. And I'm not so sure whether it's a good idea to bring it up or not. What do you think?
I don't know about.
You think we should? Huh?
Well, as long as it's now a natural. I think of the positive things that happened. There were negatives, of course.
Yeah.
I've been attacked. The night Joe Louis beat Max Berry in Chicago.
Yeah.
I was attacked about 4 or 5 white guys with baseball bats and such, you know.
Yeah.
But they didn't run very well.
Yeah. They didn't run through it.
Yeah. I ran until I could only hear one set of footsteps behind me. Yeah. And I turned and looked, so I slowed down a little. Nobody ever caught me.
Well,
only one, you know. But that's one thing. Yeah. But it never changed the way I am.
There you go. Absolutely.
Because 3 years later, at least, I was singing on 47th Street at the Warwick Hall with Johnny Long's orchestra. And when I came out, and it was about 5 in the afternoon, in the summer, and some white kid was riding a bike down 47th Street, and about 4 or 5 black guys snatched him off his bicycle. Yeah. And one took the bike and rode off. And the rest of them were beating him up on the ground, you know. Yeah. And I walked across the street and I stopped it. I said, "Hey, you let him alone. Get up, kid, go on." And he walked on down bloody. He walked on down the street, but he turned to look to see who it was that said, you know, that said, hey, let it.
That saved him.
I said, yeah. I said, you got his bike. What do you want?
Yeah.
What do you got the bike, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what do you want now? You know.
Yeah.
And that was the 47th Street, Pam, between St. Lawrence and Vincennes.
Yeah.
It never changed me the
Yeah.
fact that I was attacked
Yeah.
by a group of
Well, it never made
guys that didn't know what to
it
handle.
never made you reach the point where you hated people, or hated Caucasians, because
Hate's too important. Hate's
it's too important an emotion, right?
yeah. And not only that, reading. I was just thinking this morning. I got to go do something. I got to go down to the 700 Club to do a thing. You know.
Yeah.
I was thinking of the many things that I've read that made me the way I am. For instance, there was a book. I think it was called "This Is My Beloved." I'm not sure. And the first page of that book was, because hate is legislated,
Yeah.
written into the primer and the testament,
Yeah. Yeah.
shot into our blood like vaccine or vitamins.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, because our day is of time. It goes on to say,
Yeah.
because our day is of time, and black timeless night sucks us in without a prayer or one long last look. See, I need love
Yeah. That's
more than
most
ever now.
important,
You know,
Yeah.
I need your love because your face is, what is it? Because of your face, your lips are warm or something like that, and God has made no other eyes like yours. I need your love more than ever now. You know, that kind of thing. Love has always been the key.
That's the bottom line.
And the key when I was a kid, going to school, I mean, to church. And the minister said, God is love.
Yeah, that's true.
And I said, what? Wait a minute. God is love, yeah? Yeah. Okay. Now you can understand all these miracles come about because of love, man.
Oh, yeah.
You can understand all of this, the miracle of life itself. You know?
But even before you figure that out, Joe, there was something.
And we're in his
within
image.
you.
We're supposed to be in his image.
Yeah, that's true. There was something within you that motivated you to not succumb to the principles or the tactics that you were being oppressed with to make you hate people. I'll give you a similar relate a similar incident. I'm traveling in the South, in Meridian, Mississippi, and I was with a carnival, Reuben and Cherry Carnival. So we went in the deep South and for winter quarters. And while playing this show during the week, they always hire somebody in the city as a hired hand to keep law and order on the midway. You know, always invariably the show that was the black show was always at the end of the midway. So this cat comes through. Now this is closing night, and we're getting ready to go pack up the crew and pack up all of the equipment, and the crew puts things together. We get on the train. We have our own train, and we going on to the next place. So I'm waiting for the drummer, Marvin Wright, who's a good buddy of mine, to pack up his drums. And while waiting for the drummer to pack up his drums, he had met a lady during the week, and she was fair complexion, you know, and you know the situation down there with yeah. So I'm standing,
almost white your mind.
That's right. So I'm standing there with Marvin's lady friend, waiting on Marvin to unpack his drums because the Mills Blue Rhythm Band was playing in town that night. So we're going to the dance. Well, here comes this little cat, and I'm standing there. He said, "What are you doing standing out there on this mirror after the license are Nigerian?" You know?
Yeah.
So I said, "Well, I'm waiting on the drummer." He said, "You with this here show, boy?" I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "What'd you say?"
Yes, I am.
I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Do you realize what you said?" I said, "Well, you asked me a question and I answered it properly, I thought."
Yeah.
He said, "Do you realize that you said yes to a white man, and that's all I remember. I got a black jacket at home right now to remind me of this. One of those lead things covered in the. He hit me right here, man. Bam! And my head got so big, I don't know what happened after that, except that what I was told by the train crew. Now, this is an example of that could have motivated me to hate Caucasians the rest of my life, but it didn't.
Because you.
But here's what happened: when he left me laying in a puddle of mud, and the work crew was all Caucasian. They picked me up, took me back to the show trains, and by the time they got back, this dude comes back with about 20 people with axes and sledgehammers and chains and saws and picks and shovels and everything. Say, where's that Nigerian we left laying down there in that mud? Yeah. And the guys, the Caucasians said to him, oh, he was some smart aleck. We just kicked him in the pants and set him up that way. So they ran that way looking for me, where in reality I was back here in the show train. So that's one hand washes the other. You know. And this is long before I even realized the importance of love, and was motivated by love after that. But this was just something within me that helped me to balance out decency and right from wrong. You know.
There's good guys, and then there's those other people who can't.
Mm-hmm. Put that back. You don't want to have nothing. Put.
I love you too. Yeah, we've had a lot, we've had a lot of that stuff happen, but it never. It does affect the music in one way.
Makes you keep on keeping on.
Yeah, but if you're doing a sad, like a sad song, a sad thing, I think it puts another feeling into what you're doing, you know.
Absolutely.
When you realize that somebody out there, man, for no reason.
You know, that's a very, very important ingredient in the perpetuation of the craft of jazz. And this I got from, you just reiterated the same thing that people have said, like Coleman Hawkins, Ben Webster, Bud Johnson, Buddy Tate. They all knew the lyrics to every tune that they played.
Right.
And they said that if you...
Lester Young.
That's right. If you know the lyrics to a tune, you can express it in a much more meaningful manner than if you don't know the lyrics. So for instance, here's a kid's gonna play I Love You. Well, you say, we be your time. You wouldn't say to a girl, I love you, you know. You think she's gonna believe that crap? She ain't going for that, but if she said to her like, I love you, she might, might get across, you know. But it's very, very important to know the lyrics.
I think Roy Hargrove, he thrills me.
Yeah,
one of the young people coming along.
Yeah.
I was at the IGA, the Jazz Educators. You know, Mike, why don't you say, when you go, never mind, Mike.
Yeah.
Okay. I was at the Jazz Educators, and he played, and the end of a love affair, that thing. And he got to the line like, ba-da-dee, and the songs that I request are not always the best, but the ones where the trumpets blare.
Yeah.
It was so soft and pretty, like, I looked at John Hendricks.
He was singing the lyrics.
I looked at John Hendricks, and I looked at the judge. The judge was there. We all, the three of us, we were honored that year. And I looked at him and said, where do these young people get this kind of concept? Wait a minute, you know, to bring tears to your eyes and give you goosebumps, man.
Well, you know, he's a very special kid to me because my wife Gwen knows his mother very well, and she headed up a program called STAR, Students Targeting Adult Responsibility, and they were very basically responsible for his education. they garnered funds from different sources. Now, even I kicked in a few bucks. We sent him to Berkeley, you know, and he studied at Berkeley. So he came up the hard way, and he came up the soulful way. You know?
Didn't he?
So yeah.
Because it shows. I heard Johnny Pate, whom you know, of course, from Chicago. Johnny lives in Las Vegas, and he has a radio show on UNLV station.
Yeah.
And he plays Johnny Griffin's thing with Roy Hargrove often. And I'm so thrilled that he's getting some airplay, you know, and some attention, because for a while there, thought that Winton was the only trumpet player. You know. And
there's several of them out there now.
I know that.
Nicholas Payton, that's my favorite.
There's always been several people somewhere, you know, that could blow. You know, when they were raving about everybody else, there you were in St. Louis, and you could blow. You know, as soon as you get them out there, and Duke had you out there, stuck you out front, and get them. You know, and they say, well, okay. The first person that Duke Ellington said, beyond category, and I have Duke saying this on tape. He was on a radio broadcast, and he said, Clark Terry, yes, Clark Terry, Clark. He says, well, Clark could play everything from way out bop, bebop to Dixieland. He could play everything in between. I just call him a man beyond category.
Yeah, I remember when he used to do that.
That you were the one that he started that with, you know.
Yeah, that's a great subject to talk on. We could talk forever on that. I like to borrow one of his favorite phrases, which happens to be one of mine. He was always very quick to let you know how he, you know, evaluated the situation. And he would always say, well, you know, me, I'm the most easy person in the world to please. I'm very easy to please. Just give me the best. I love that. I love that one.
Yeah. And the other one I love of his is, I'm not going to let you or anybody else make me lose my pretty ways.
Yeah.
You know, I will stay constant, you know, like straight ahead.
And he was always very, very pleasing to when ladies saw him coming on. The ladies are always happy to see him, because he would always make a lady feel great. And he would always walk up to her and say, hello, whose pretty little girl are you? You know, if he saw her the second time, gosh, you're prettier today than you were yesterday.
My wife and I took a friend to see him, her best friend, and he pulled this on me. You'll love it. The girls were sitting together, and I was sitting on the aisle. So Paul Gonsalves is playing. It's what they call a strolling violin. He's got his horn. He's going down the aisle, and he's playing Laura, you know, on his horn. And so he gets to me, and he sees me, and he goes. He starts blowing. He's blowing everything. He gets back on the stage, and he leans over and he whispers to Duke, you got to know Paul and Duke Ellington. So he leads to Duke. He said, and Duke says, yes. What was that you said? Now Paul's going to get exasperated with Duke. That is like, you know, that in itself is a situation that you're looking at. If you know what you're looking at, he is going to get exasperated with Duke. Really? So he said, Joe Williams. Yes. Joe Williams, you mean our Joe Williams? Of Basie fame? You mean he's lending his aura to us tonight? You know? I can't believe where? Now he's really exasperated. Right out there.
All the while he's doing a stolen violin bit.
No, he's through.
He's
through playing. Now, you know, they're supposed to get on to the next number. And this is while they're trying to get to the next number, you know. And so Duke is starting him like, you know, playing him like a violin. Duke's playing him like a violin, really. Then he had a topper. He had a topper for it. And so then finally Duke looks, he says, where? He says, out there in the audience. This is in the Hilton. He said, Ah, yes. You mean the fellow sitting out there with Jill? I fell in the aisle, boy. I laughed.
Yeah.
I laughed, man. And her best friend, Betsy, said, if you think this isn't going to get back to England, you're sadly mistaken. Oh, I love it. So now we go upstairs. Yeah. He's got this room. He says, come here, you got to see my bedroom. This canopy with a pink chiffon, you know, over it, and a mirror over the bed, you know, like that. And he comes out, and he gets Betsy by the hand, and he's holding her hand, you know. He says, my dear, did they tell you why they brought you here tonight?
Did they tell you why what?
Why they brought you here.
Oh.
and sit there and held hands with her on that couch, you know, for the entire time that we were there.
He was so nice.
And he talked and everything, then he turned. Charm back on her, you know. Like, he was a monster, boy. He was really a monster.
He used to have another saying that I crack up every time I think about it. He used to say to us that invariably all the weird and weirdest characters would seek him out, would always come with it. So you'd see strange people coming around the bandstand, coming out, say, which one of them Dickie Wellington? You know, what the piano player's name? You know, they would always seek him out. So he would always say, listen, they come from miles around and they seek me out. And every time one of those situations was about to happen, he'd hit a little disco on. And he'd say, miles around. And we'd look up, and sure as heck, there's a weird character making his way to the bandstand. Hey, Dickie Wellington.
Basie had his little thing too, didn't he?
Oh, yeah.
Ding, ding.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord. They had their signals together, didn't they?
Yeah, between those two beautiful people, man.
Man.
We could write books and talk for ages.
Yeah.
I can tell you my favorite Basie story, though. I've told this many times, but when we were with the small group, after he broke up the big band, you know. Yeah, you know, what am I telling you? Well, we're playing in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and this was during a period when we were not allowed to stay in the big hotels. We were relegated to the homes of Miss Brown, Miss Jones, Miss Green, and so forth. So,
those were the good old days. They wake you up and feed. Baby, have you had your breakfast yet? No, ma'am.
Okay. So we had Miss Green, Miss Brown, somebody's home, and she said, well, I got one room left, and I got 2 beds in it, and one is a big bed and one's a little bed, and I can take 2 of them. So she says, okay. So Basie and I are the only 2 left, you know. so I'm rooming with Basie. So the big bed is in the middle of the room, huge bed. And he's got that. Well, my bed was a little slab up against the wall, you know. So I said, okay, that's beautiful. At least there's some place to sleep other than in the basement of the police station, you know. So here we are. And now Basie couldn't go to sleep with the light out.
I know.
Had to have that light on.
Yeah.
And he had to read his comic book every night. And he'd laugh, So I said, well, I couldn't go to sleep with the light on. So I said, well, I know what I'll do. I'll just play possum and wait till I hear the comic strip hit comic book hit his belly, plop, then I'll know he's asleep. Well, I should preface this by saying it's always customary for people when they go to bed, you do, and we all do, empty our pockets on the dresser, you know, and undress and put pajamas on and go to sleep. So I had put all my things there, and basically put all his things on the dresser. We didn't have a drawer, you know, just a little tabletop, so we put our stuff there. So the light is right by this little tabletop, and so I had to get up and go over, turn on. When I heard the book go plop on his belly, I eased over to the light and grabbed the chain and then pulled the chain. Now, the minute I pulled the chain, before I released it, he sat straight on the bed and said, put it back. I was never sure that put the light back or whether he thought I had absconded with his belongings. Put it back.
Oh, Lord. Put it back.
Put it back.
Oh, man. Roommates.
Yeah.
And Sonny Payne, when I joined the Basie band, because I had a lot of roommates, though.
Oh,
I had
yeah.
Snooky Young while we were in St. Louis here.
Yeah.
Snooky and I were roommates, and we shared a bathroom with Melba Liston, who had the next, she had, like the joining door,
Yeah.
the bathroom on her side and on our side.
Like the Southway in
the
Chicago.
three of us, yeah. Oh, God, the Southway in Chicago.
It was in that
I remember
one
when the
little
South,
bath
I
in
remember,
between.
I remember when the Southway was really the Southway. It
Yeah.
was all white.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
The Southway Hotel?
Sure.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
In fact, yeah, everything,
60th and South Parkway?
yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah, it was all that.
Well, I didn't know that.
You know they didn't build that for us.
No, but I thought that didn't come into, I didn't think
We
it come
get-
into existence.
No, we get hand-me-down. Do you think that the Braddock in
In New York?
the Teresa in New York or what? No, we never have it. Nobody, black man didn't build no hotels. If they did it, they did it in Chicago, like this boy built Roberts.
Roberts, yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But like
Yeah,
the rest
that
of
was
that stuff
probably-
we had was hand-me-down.
Yeah.
You know, like white folks moved out
Yeah, that's true.
and we moved in.
Yeah.
You know,
So,
all of that, all those things.
urban renewal, Nigerian removal.
Yeah, or whatever. yeah, whatever, you know. But we had nice places, though.
Yeah.
We had very nice places, and they kept them very nice. Because at the time, I remember South Park was Grand Boulevard, and it was grand.
yeah.
It was beautiful.
That's where the Grand Terrace was. That's what they call it. Yeah.
Grand Terrace.
Yeah.
The Grand Terrace was on Grand
30th,
Boulevard
35th?
between 39th.
29th, yeah.
Between, not 39, Oakwood.
Second.
Oakwood.
Oakwood.
Between Oakwood Boulevard
Oakwood, yeah.
and 40th Street.
Yeah, which is where the Du Saba was.
Yeah.
Oakwood.
No, DuSable.
Further
Yeah, it
up,
was
yeah.
down on
Yeah.
That was down
Over
on
toward the
Oakwood.
lake, yeah.
Yeah, toward the lake, yeah.
Yeah.
That was, ooh, man, that was hip.
Yeah.
But even
The
those,
mighty do.
and the Pershing,
Yeah.
all those were white hotels.
Yeah.
And so anyway, you talking about the Southway.
Yeah.
I lived at 61st in Indiana,
Oh, you right
in a
on
new
the corner.
apartment block, and we had white janitors and
Yeah.
what have you, because no blacks were in the superintendent's union, you see,
Yeah.
or the
Yeah.
janitors union. What have you.
Yeah.
But that thing, the Southway Hotel, man, no,
Southway.
none of that it was really South, deep South, Southway.
Yeah, that was the hotel.
The school I attended, Sexton,
Oh, yeah?
yeah, which was on between 61st and 60th Street on
Over to the lake?
yeah, Champlain
Oh.
on one side and Langley on the other.
Oh, yeah.
And I graduated from Sexton. I was trying to say Austin Otis Sexton, I think it was.
Austin Otis.
A.O. Sexton, that's right. Austin Otis Sexton Grammar School. And when I went to that school, I think I was the only Splo that was there.
Yeah.
The only black cat that was in that thing. Later on, others came, of course. The neighborhood changed. And finally, Lurleen Hunter wound up living across the street from the school.
Lil was my cousin, you know.
Yeah, Lurl.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lurl lived across the street from me at 6153 Indiana. She
Indiana.
lived across the street in the building that the Slappies owned.
Oh, yeah.
And she lived upstairs with her mother, and I forget, I was 10 years old, something like that. But I chased her in the house one day. Upstairs, through the gangway upstairs. Because we call her string bean.
Yeah, she was scared.
So we get in there, and her mother's in there, and she says, "Hi, darling, what'd you want?" I said, "Lurleen." She says, "Oh, yes." She says, "What are you going to do with Lurleen?" I said, "I'm going to hit her." And she said, "Oh, baby, don't you put an arm around me. Don't ever go to somebody's home and fight them like this." I said, "No, ma'am, no." I said, "Okay." That's not there. Lurleen, see you outside.
Don't let them come out.
Silly.
She was such a mama's girl. She couldn't leave mama. She was a great little singer. Most people will remember her who remember back to the Camel Soup commercials.
Yeah.
Ooh, girl, that's what Camel Soups are. Remember that?
Yeah. You know, it took me a long time to figure out just who she sounded like an extension of Ivy Anderson.
Yeah, she did. Yeah.
You know, really,
Yeah.
that's what she did, a real extension, because she was she was smooth.
Yeah.
We sang with Johnny Long's band together, you know.
Did you?
Yeah, we did for dancing. Then we
Yeah.
danced in between numbers, you know, when we weren't singing, we danced together.
I thought you were going to say Les Height. She used to say.
No, I worked with Les.
Yeah, she
but
did
she wasn't
too.
with him.
Yeah.
He had, let's see, who was it? See, Bobby, somebody was playing piano with him, a girl, black girl named Bobby something. And I've forgotten the girl's thing he had. But he came to Chicago. He had T-Bone Walker with him at the Regal Theater, as I remember. But I worked with him at a place in Delavan, Wisconsin, called Lake Lawn during the summer. One summer he was up there, and I was the head waiter. I wasn't a head waiter. I was a waiter up there at night. In the daytime, I was the porter. And I was cleaning up. I was going through a bad time with a love affair. And
With Llama.
girl, no, this is Wilma, my first lady.
Oh, yeah.
My first love, man. She was putting me through it, and I was going for it.
Yeah.
So I was working 2 jobs, saving money. I learned a lot. Ooh, the lessons I learned from that, man.
Yeah.
You know, like my parents, they laid it on me during that period, because I had $200 or $300. It was 1940.
Yeah.
I never had $200 or $300 of my own to do. So I gave the money to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here, hold this money for me.
When you mentioned that
And they taught me to keep my own money. Go ahead.
it's a good lesson.
They ran me through it. Go ahead.
When you mentioned that Lurleen
Yeah.
sounded a bit like Ivy Anderson, it made me think of Duke Ellington always said that his idea of a perfect singer was one who sounded like Ivy Anderson and looked like Lena Horne.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he addressed his ladies for her.
Yeah.
God, those sheer sheaths they used to wear.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But no decoration at all, not even pearls
Yeah.
or anything. There was nothing to take. And it reminds me of what his father, I understand, used to say that, you sure make that dress look pretty.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, you sure make that hat look pretty. You know, that kind of thing, you know.
Yeah.
His daddy was slick too. He knew what to say. But that was Duke Ellington. Of course, we could talk for a year
Yeah. Maestro used
on
to.
Duke Ellington.
Yeah. Oh, what a marvelous person.
Yeah.
I learned so much from him. I'm sure you did too. We all did. Just through the process of osmosis, being around him, so many things just rubbed off on you that you wouldn't even happen to be aware of at that particular time until you needed the situation to push your button. What would Maestro have done in this case? Bang, here comes the answer.
Right.
Right out, just like a tape.
I had him. I had Andy Kirk as well.
Oh, Andy was, yeah.
You know, and I'm talking about Smooth Silk.
Yeah.
I was dad and said, well, I don't think I need pot, you know.
Yeah.
And I said, I think I'd be like this cat, man. I don't think I need pot. Because about that time, I think I was enjoying pot every day. You know, every day, you know, like, and just like that. Did the same thing with tobacco, though. Yeah, one day I said, well, I think I've had this. And I finished this pipe. Put the pipe in the ashtray, and I haven't had any tobacco since either. One of these days, I'm going to do that with girls.
I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. You've been saying some things that particularly for the students in my class, I think are just absolutely marvelous, incredible. because you talked about experiences. Not once have I heard you mention anything that's got to do with music theory.
Music and theory.
Yeah, it seems like the music comes from someplace much deeper than that.
Oh.
And then it eventually will involve your note choices.
You got to remember, Mike, excuse me for dejecting this, but you got to remember that years before people who gave vent to their feelings, years before they knew anything about theory, harmony, composition, counterpoint, etc., they gave vent to their feelings. And they were indulging in, for lack of a better title, they called it get off. This is long before the term improvisation was coined, or before it was in the dictionary pertaining to playing music, you know. They used to call it get off. It simply meant that the first course you played the melody, and thereafter you'd use the melody as a guide wire to simply superimpose extemporaneously a melody around this given melody. So that's what became get off. So you get off the melody. So even then, the guys were giving vent to their feelings and expressing themselves, and they would use certain things that would help them to get from point A to point B. First of all, the one thing that we teach our students today, and I'm sure you do too, regardless of how much theory, harmony, counterpoint, and composition they will, you know, get in their brain, they got to know when to use it. They got to listen to when to use it, know how to use it. You know, there's a zillion educated fools walking around the street today, heads loaded with something, they don't know how to use it, don't know where to use it, and when to use it. So this is a lesson that we try very hard to get our students to understand. Now, back in those days, they didn't know anything, as we mentioned, about these technical terms, and they had nobody around to teach them. But they were determined to give vent to their feelings and express themselves and get off. So what they do, they played the blues as the main vehicle. They played the blues, and if they played a standard tune, they played the standard tune, and then superimpose melody around it. But on the blues, they figured out a good way to give vent to their feelings is somebody had the ingenuity, even without knowledge, to figure out that here's the tonic, that's the one. Then you go up with the scale, 1, 2, 3, that's the third. They lower that a half step, bah, that's the minor third. You go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, lower that half step, bah. So you got a tonic, a minor third, flatter fifth, and they didn't know then that it constituted a half diminished. They couldn't care less, you know. All they knew, they called them the blue notes. And they say, man, you got your blue notes? Yeah, baby, I got them down. I'm working on F sharp now, but I'm gonna hear that tomorrow. But they refer to them as the blue notes. And right today, you take a class and you take your rhythm section, or if you just play bass line, tell them to play one note. Just play the time. Bob, two Dr. Blues. Bob, dab, dab, any kind of rhythmic pattern they want. Do that, and then the next go, tell them to take the two notes, the tonic and the minor. Do, 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 that. Then the next time, take the flat fifth and the minor third. Bang, do, that, do, that, do. Now you can't pick out no more beautiful and important notes in playing the blues than those three. Then you go into your seven, and pretty soon they reach the point where it's almost, we use it for discipline too. And all, just that one note, those two notes, or those three. Because after a while, they're going to begin to hear all of the relative notes that constitute the blues scale. You know, and then they're going to hear the four, they're going to hear the flat five, some people call the augmented seven, the flat six, they're going to hear the seven, the major seven, the nine, the flat nine, and the 13, and all of them, and they hear the whole scale then. But after a while, they're going to, for a period of time, they're going to be involved in playing those blue notes, the blue notes, the tonic, the minor third, and the flatter fifth, and they got it. And if you find a cat who's pretty well endowed in playing the blues with those three things in mind, you ever listen to his things, all these things?
Yeah. But you sing that thing you playing it back.
Any kind of rhythmic pattern.
And while that's going on, the other cat say, hey, let's do this thing over here.
Yeah. 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 And that's after a while they can hear all that, because then you got to.
Then you can take it, give it. That's the section. Give it to your brass man. You know,
hear all
the brass will play muted though. I mean, blap, blap, blap.
Yeah, just create any kind of rhythmic pattern they want. False fingering, octaves, or shakes, fall-offs, rips, darts, or whatever. A lot of things that are incorporated in the Italian dictionary we can't use in jazz. They don't express what we want. You wouldn't hardly say to a cat on the bandstand, let's play some Largo blues. There's some far more descriptive terminology that we use.
What did Edward say? Hey, let's do, our thing.
Yeah, there you go.
Let's do our thing, Yeah. And he said, Dada, listen.
Yeah, that was his pet word, listen. He would hit a discard to get your attention and then tell you, listen. And we used to think, this cat think we're deaf or something, and pretty soon he would let us know.
Yeah.
All he was concerned about was total listening. And he would tell you in front, he wants you to make sure that you're aware of everything that's going on
There
around.
you
What
go.
your little part that you're contributing to the overall performance, what it means, You'd be surprised. Now, I use this joke as a good way of relating to people to get them to understand what Ellington meant by listening. The two tuba players met in the supermarket one day after the day off, and one said this, so what did you do last night? So, oh, the old lady dragged me out to the opera. Yeah, what did they do? They did Carmen. Yeah? He said, yeah, that's the one we enjoy so much in measure 356 where we go boom, 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 boom. He said, yeah. He said, do you know what the rest of them idiots were playing? He said, no. Dee 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 do do dee do. So that is a good lesson in how they were so concerned about that. This cat didn't even know that was a all he knew, boom, boom, boom. And then so often,
That's funny.
so often we go through scenes like that where the kids totally oblivious as to what's going on with the rest of what their little part means to the overall performance,
That's my first statement when I go into schools to talk to a class. If you can't hear everybody else in this orchestra, you are playing too loud. And they look at each other. What? Because it opens up a whole new vista for them, a whole new world. That's my opening statement. And I use Clark's words so many times in talking to the students. I tell them, and I quote her, Clark Terry said, remember we went on the tour together, and we were doing schools. And he had a high school group then. He said, listen, don't be afraid to imitate somebody. All of us started by imitating somebody.
Absolutely.
He said, you go from imitation to assimilation, from assimilation to innovation.
We call them the Asian stages. You got to go through them Asian stages.
So it's
everybody imitated something. The first
evolution.
Even the first cat didn't hear nothing but railroad tracks. He imitated that. Or whatever. You got to imitate something.
Ellington was the Daybreak Express. And it sounds like a train. Yeah. Now, what else you want?
The thing I was going to say that I thought is so fabulous is that these sounds finds their way into your repertoire of expression, and the emphasis is expression rather than execution. There's a lot of people today, because there's a lot of method books written on jazz, who can play the notes, but no authenticity seems to arise from those myriad of notes. It's not about just your ability to how fast or how loud that you can play.
Absolutely not.
One other thing I wanted to ask you all is, where do you see anything in our present American culture, and particular African American culture, that seems to be spawning new life to breathe back life back into this oral culture? And you mentioned Roy Hargrove, and I'm pleased by that too.
Well, there's a lot of young guys out there that are doing it. A lot of them. Little Nicholas Payton, the little guy that wrote for what's his name's book, More Better. What's that guy that wrote that?
More Better Blues.
Yeah, the black director.
Spike Lee?
Spike Lee. Cat that wrote his score for his, what's his name?
Terrence Blanchard?
Terrence Blanchard.
Yeah.
People like him. There's tons of them out there, and I have an opportunity to run into them being involved in the jazz education, a lot of them. So I would like to say that the whole situation, people used to say jazz was dead. It never was even sick in people's minds, but it's very, very much alive.
Yeah.
Joseph, I got a Basie story that I don't know.
Count bases.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if everybody knows about this, but when I was with the Basie band, when I left Basie band to join Duke, I left.
Yeah.
Well,
You would think.
yeah, we had kicked it around a little bit, and he'd sent his scouts around, John Sully, Al Sully, and Evie, and all the people would come around, and Joe, was it the little, Joe, his publicity man.
Oh, yeah.
Joe Morgan.
Yeah. Joe Morgan.
Joe Morgan.
Yeah.
Said, you want to join the band now?
Yeah.
And I used to like that little hat that he used to wear, and he said, I'll get you a hat like this if you join. So finally, we talked about it long enough. I finally had decided, well, I think I'd like to join Duke's band. And this is when, at this time, Basie was down to
Quintet.
small, yeah.
Yeah.
So he came. We working in Chicago. I'm at the Southway Hotel. We working at the Brass Wheel, right? Yeah. So Duke finally he comes around and says, "Hey, I'd like to discuss things with you, sweetie." I said, "Okay." He said, "But we can't do it out in public, so maybe I'll have to come to your hotel." So I said, "Okay." I'm at the Southway. He says, "All right, I'll come by and I'll call you when I get in the lobby, and I'll hurriedly get out of the lobby and meet you in your room." So I says, "Okay." So he comes up to the hotel and calls up and says, "Oh yeah, all right." So we go. He says, "I'll meet you on your floor, and you meet me at the elevator and show me where it is." So I said, "All right." So Duke gets off the elevator. About the same time, I come out my door, and just as I walk out my door, Duke steps off the elevator, and next door to me is Freddie Green.
Yeah.
Freddie Green opens his door and steps out. He said, "Oh, you know," his favorite saying. And went back, bam, slammed the door. So Coach Duke and I went on with our business. But that night on the gig, Freddie, I walked in, and Pep would look at you like this. Didn't even say hello. If you don't, you're a fool. So the funny thing is that the conversation with me and Duke, he said, "Well, no, we had agreed on the bread and everything, and for me it was big bread in those days because I was making with Basie $125 a week, and the last part of my stint with the Basie band, I got a raise, $15 raise, so I'm making $140 a week, and Duke says, Duke's giving me the $225 a week.
All right.
Oh man, that was great, big bread for me, because it was cats in there making 3 and 4 and 5, but I didn't know it. But to me, that was big bread. So that day he said to me, he said, "Well, it's just not the proper protocol for a person to snatch somebody out of his buddy's band, so we'll have to strategically work this out." I said, "Okay, what do you suggest?" He said, "Well, I'll tell you what I think. I think you should maybe just get sick and tell Bill that you're going to go home and recuperate, and while you're home recuperating, I'll put you on salary." Yeah? Wow, man, I ain't got no better deal than that. So I pulled him back and I told Bass that, put my notice in. I said, "Bass, I'm just not feeling good. I just need to go home and just get off." He said, "Yeah, okay." He said, "Well, when you get yourself together, you come on back, because, this is always home for you." So I said, "Thanks, I appreciate it very much." So I went home. I'm on salary right away. The first check, wham! So before I get home, good, So this went on until the band just happened to come through St. Louis. 3 months later, I'm on salary for 3 months. They come through St. Louis, played the Kiel Auditorium.
Yeah.
And on November the 11th,
Hello.
Armistice Day, and I just happened to join the band.
Oh.
That was a big show.
Yeah.
With Servon,
Yeah.
Buck, Stumpy, Peg Leg Bass, Patterson and Jackson, and all this on the big show.
Yes, I remember.
So I don't know, it's 51 or 52. But anyhow, I left and went with the band. I stayed with the band for almost 10 years, And years later, I went to the Carnegie Hall when Basie was already sick and he had to take that little side elevator to ride up.
Uh-huh.
This is before they installed the thing that they got there now. And I went backstage to see him, and I'm standing up at the top, and he's coming up. I said, Holy, you know one thing? He said, yeah, so what's that? I said, I have a confession to make to you. Something that's been bugging me for years and years. He said, yeah. He said, what is it? I said, when I left the band, you know, and told you I was sick, going home, I said, I wasn't really sick. He said, He said, the reason I did that is because Duke had made me an offer I couldn't pass up. He said, He said, why do you think I took the raise back? You think I didn't know that? He took me. All these years I've been bugging myself, you know.
You're beating yourself to death.
Yeah, like the joke about this guy hanging out the window. By his foot.
Yeah.
Finally just gave up and let go, and he was that far from the ground.
Basie. Boy, it's funny. On the bus, that bus is something. I wasn't with the band at this time, but John Williams, who was still with the Basie band, told me the story. He came in there after Poopsie, you know, and he, you know, had the gig and was doing all right. And then suddenly, Basie let him go.
Yeah.
And Charlie folks came back. So later on, he came back after Charlie died. He came back with the band. So he asked Basie, he said, Basie, what happened? He said, really? He said, me and you, because you know I love you, and was my work satisfactory? He said, yeah, your work was all right. He said, yeah.
This is John talking to Basie.
Talking to Basie, you know. Yeah. So he said, well, Chief, he said, what happened with us? He said, well, you remember the night on the bus when y'all thought I was asleep and you called me a mother or something?
Called him a Maryland farmer?
A Maryland farmer, boy. Hey, Basie, that Maryland farmer. He said, you remember? He said, I didn't even move. He said, I just said, So when he got a chance, he said, he said, oh, Chief, yeah, Basie was full of them, though.
Oh,
the cats be able to get on that high horse, you know.
You couldn't pull nothing over on him.
Yeah.
He knew everything.
They get on that high horse and get on that bus, start talking crap, and ground can and Basie wake up. Stop the bus. You stop the bus. And stop the bus. Basie reach up and get his little brown sack over his head. He kept it fresh fruit, you know, his little sack over his head. Might have a sandwich in there, fruit, what have you know. He'd reach up and get an apple, go take a bite or two out of it, go back to sleep. Anyway, Basie stop the bus, reach up and get a little brown sack. And then he'd get off the bus. He said, all right, you can go ahead now. Said, oh no, Basie, wait a minute, Basie, wait a minute. He said, oh?
My boss said,
You mean you need me? Well, I thought we'd better just go on without me, you understand? Oh no, Basie, the cats would come up and cry. No, they like that. Should just stop the bus and get off and say, you got it.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You know. He was so funny. When I left him, I got a group together, you know. So my mother had a stroke in Chicago, and I flew into Chicago to spend time with her. And I checked into the Manor House, and who was in there with Basie?
Yeah, that was his favorite place.
And I was in the room that he was in when I talked to him about joining the band.
Yeah.
You know, that's the story in itself. He said, when you come in there, join him, you know, I talked to him, and I go back to that. He said, why don't you come with me and see what people all over the country think of your work?
Yeah.
He said, you hot top singer in the Midwest right now, in the area, Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Minneapolis, and Buffalo even, you know, because I was working at Moonglow about 6 weeks a year, something like that. He said, but he said, in a little while, somebody be saying, hey, have you heard Shorthouse over there singing? Shorty over there. Yeah, the men's room attendant over at the, you heard him sing, man? He said, woo-wee. Somebody else is coming, you know? He says, why don't you come with me and see how, what people all over the country think of your work? And I can't give you what you want or what you need, right? But I can give you something.
Remember? That was there.
But I can give you something. So no, you know what he gave me, $25 a week. But when I was working with you and him and the quintet, he would reasonably pocket give me $50. You know, which was something.
I'll never forget that period.
You got mad at me?
Oh, I got mad at Joe. Joe Louis and who's that?
Ezra
Charles were fighting for the heavyweight championship. So me and
you and Basie and Freddie Green. Everybody was mad at me.
He's the only one that said, "Dog, that nigga, he's gonna
he ain't got
clean
no business in there with that snake."
Clean Joe Louis. Are you kidding, man? Me and Basie and Freddie were loaded his whole salary and more. He loaded up, and we bet. And Ezra Charles cleaned Joe Louis.
and listen, and you know how I got paid? Each one of them, you know, like this, and each one like this.
We didn't believe it.
Maryland farmer.
We paid him begrudgingly.
I was many Maryland farmers that night. Because at that time, there were two things that were mortal cinch. One of them was Joe Louis, and the other was the Yankees. You were pretty safe betting money on any of in those days, because they just took out whatever.
It was the 40s, wasn't it?
No, it was the 50s. It was the late 40s. Late 40s. But when Joe began to decline, because I remember it was 1950, Christmas of 1950, or a week or two before, that I left you guys down there at the Brass Rail, and I went to work at Club de Lisa for the first time. And in Chicago.
Red Saunders.
But Red Saunders. Lurleen.
Nick
Lurleen
Cooper,
was there.
Lurleen.
Yeah, she was there.
Sonny Cohen.
Sonny Cohen.
Nick Cooper.
Later on Jesse Miller.
Jesse Miller.
And that front line, he had Washington on saxophone. And wound up with Porter Kilburn playing lead.
What was Mr. Loblow's name? What was his name? Mr. Lobo used to say that.
Mac Easton.
Mac Easton,
baritone player. But Ed Sytoff playing in there, John Avant and Sytoff, the two trombones. But two trumpets, two trombones, and four saxes. Four. I think it was four. 3. And piano, bass, and drums, and guitar sometimes too.
Who's the piano player?
Washington.
Washington.
Very good piano player.
Sure was.
Arranger too. He was really, really fine. But Basie, he was the cutest thing. I started to tell you, I went home. This is 1961 or 62. And because Mother had a stroke, and Basie was in the same hotel with me, with us. And I had a phone call from the fellas, musicians. It seems he was going into Canada. It had been stopped. And one of the guys, I had Crip. Crip said, Joe, they went through all your luggage and everything. And he said, man, when they came to that soap powder you had, because I would buy Tide and put it in a plastic bag. Instead of having the box, I put it in a plastic bag and throw it in in the bottom of my suitcase.
Yeah.
Because I washed my underclothes and my shirts.
Yeah.
I had those shirts that you could wash and
Yeah,
hang up, wash and wear, you know?
Yeah.
And he said, boy, they found that. And they said, ah, what have we here? You know, they opened it up and went, and then coughed and sneezed with
Serves them right.
Yeah, you know. But it turned out that one of the guys, go ahead, you want to say something?
No, it's, on that point, I tricked them one time. I had a big sack full of dirty laundry.
Oh, yeah?
And they were very inquisitive. I said, well, look, see, and they were a little bit unhappy, you know.
Oh,
after,
that's tough.
After digging through my soiled underwear.
Well, that's standard operating procedure. Ladies know how to do that. They know how to pack. You know. But somebody, they were traveling in Europe, and with a group. Norman Simmons tells that story, and the people stopped him, customs stopped him, wanted to go in the bag. So this chick, she opened the bag and started throwing out dirty wet pants. And, you know, two Texans, people just throw it there. Right? And they say, no, it's all right. No, it's all right. Put it back in there and go and get out of here.
I gotta tell you one of my favorite Basie stories. You know, Basie, he loved ham and cabbage, as you know.
Lord, I do too.
Who doesn't? Yeah. But he loved it with a passion. So one day, when I was with Duke's band at the time, and his band was playing Birdland, and we were playing, remember the club upstairs called the Bandbox?
Yes.
At the same time. So we're in the Bandbox with Charlie Parker and Duke Ellington, and downstairs is Basie. You might have been down there with it. But anyhow, I used to snitch a ride home every night with Catherine, Basie's wife. She'd pick him up and drive. And they had to pass by my house in Dory Miller Co-op. Yeah. So I'd ride home. So we're in the conversation. On the way home, we talk about everything that had happened with the band all the years that I was with him. So this particular day, knowing that he loved ham and cabbage, I said, Basie, I hate to tell you this, man, but we had ham and cabbage today, man. It was so good. And I'm going to go home now. Go upstairs and heat it up and whale on it before I go to bed. So I said, And we start talking about other things. So when they got to my house, it was like just before daybreak, you know. You get out of...
Birdland at 4 o'clock.
Yeah. So I get out of the car and I walk across the street and say, good night, Katie. Good night, Holy. I walk across the street and I thought I'd hear a car drive. All of a sudden I heard, them little hard heels. He coming across the street. I looked around. He says, you got to go to the bathroom, Holy? He said, He said, yeah, you think you're going to go up there and heat up that ham and cabbage without me? You out of your cotton picking bag. He went upstairs with me, man, and we heated up ham and cabbage, and he ate, and he put his feet up on the coffee table.
Went to sleep.
Went to sleep.
Yeah, he could sleep around us.
Yeah.
I remember another wonderful afternoon. We used to play up in Philadelphia, play Peps. And we'd start there by playing Monday matinee. So we'd be off then for several hours before the evening performance would start, like 8:30 or 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock at night started the evening performance on Monday. So Earl Hines was home in Philadelphia with Janie, his wife, and they had us over for dinner. Basie band. They had this long table set up, man, and greens and cornbread and ham hocks and corn and all kinds of marvelous things. And I've forgotten what the dessert was. Well, whether it was sweet potato pie or lemon cream pie, or whether it was a pie with strawberries and but it was a delicious looking thing. We're sitting there eating, and here comes Basie standing around. Basie, he had a drink, had some scotch, and he used to drink scotch in those days. He'd drinking his scotch and his dessert. Always ate his dessert first. Oh, they had beans too, red beans and rice. Eat his dessert first and just, oh man. And we're sitting there eating dinner. Then, when we finished, then he'd sit down and have his dinner. But he'd eat dessert first. He was the first person I saw to do that. It's not bad either. Not a bad way to do it. Because you might, at least you're not too full when it comes time. You know, you don't eat too much either, maybe. But he didn't miss dessert. Yeah. But anyhow, he told that the guys were having problems. And they told him, one of the guys, in fact, two of them, weren't even allowed to go back into Canada.
Oh, yeah?
No. Well, they catch up there on a narcotics charge. Then you're not allowed back in, that's all.
Yeah.
Two of the guys had been through that, you know. They should be nameless, but like, you know. So now I get this phone call. And I said, well, I'll tell you what you do. Call John Levy and tell John to get a hold of Jimmy Jones and your bass player, Sproles.
Hector.
Got Victor Sproles and Jimmy Jones come up to sub for him, you know. Yeah. And I hung up and I told bass, the bass was lying across the foot of my bed. I said, he said, what was that? I said, oh, the cats had problems up there. Couldn't get into Canada, where the gig is. Yeah. He said, why don't you tell them to kiss your ring and you get yourself a piano player and go on about your business. It's all you know, all you need is a piano player. You don't need all that other headache.
Me to go into Canada?
To work, period.
Oh, period. Is that when you started the group with Jimmy Forrest and them?
No. I'm not going to talk. No, I'm not calling any names.
Oh, okay.
And Jimmy Forrest had nothing to do with it. Jimmy went up. Jimmy went up. Sweets went up. You know, I told you we replaced the piano player and the bass player. Now, but no names.
Okay.
Didn't I tell you?
Yeah.
Okay. And we went up there and did a week.
1 and 1 is 11. I can figure that out.
Anyhow, but Basie, it said that, man, you ought to tell all those people goodbye and get you a piano player and go on about your business with your concerts, do what you got to do, you know. And he was so right.
Yeah. Sure.
But I like that. I like to pat my foot, and I love to hit. I love to share the spotlight too, man.
Yeah.
Somebody can play, you know, somebody who can swing. Oh my God, it's such a feeling. You can't. There's nothing. You can't express it.
Absolutely.
It just happens. You know, so it lifts you completely off the ground. You know, levitates you.
Joseph, I see you got your 2 iron there.
Well, this, yeah.
Is that a
traveling? It's my traveling stick.
How's your game these days?
Lousy. But it's going to be better. I think my swing is going to be better than it's ever been.
Oh, yeah?
Really, yeah. You learn more.
I heard about the game you played one day with I think you and Billy Eckstein, and all of a sudden a bear came up and tapped you. You were just getting ready to drive, and a bear tapped you on the shoulder and said, talking bear too, would you mind if we make this a threesome? And you and B looked at each other and said, never played with a bear before. Okay, so you teed off and B teed off and the bear teed off. 450-yard drive, dog leg to the left. He ended up that far from the cup. Nobody, you and B couldn't understand that. And they didn't believe it, so they got on in about 3, and come time for the bear to put out, he took his putter, 450 yards, dog. Dog leg to the left. That's a lie, of course.
I know it's a lie. I have the greatest golf story for a lie that you ever heard in your life. You know, if you were to do that kind of thing. Got nothing to do with Basie, though.
Well, that was what that had to do with you.
Yeah. No, this Scotsman.
Yeah.
He comes into the clubhouse. He says, Stuart. He says, yes, Mr. McGregor. Give everybody a round of drinks on me. He says, what? He says, give everybody a round of drinks on me. He's begging your pardon, Mr. McGregor. You've been a member of this club for 15 years and you never bought a drink for anyone. Suddenly a round of drinks for everyone? He says, yes. He says, well, what's the occasion? He says, well, today I'm 83 years old and on Thursday I'm marrying a young girl. So give everybody a round of drinks. He says, all right, Mr. McGregor. So he gives everybody drinks and like 7 months later, old man comes in and says, Stuart, give everybody a round of drinks on me. He says, ah, Mr. McGregor, and what's the occasion this time? He says, my wife just presented me with a 7-pound bouncing baby boy. Give everybody a round of drinks. He says, Mr. McGregor, don't you realize it's just 7 months since you said you were about to be married? He says, yes. He says, 200 power already in me with a whippy shaft.
Oh. I like it.
Yeah. Basie, to say Basie, the Cats gave Basie a beautiful set of clubs. Cost a lot of money in those days too, about $400 or $500.
Did he ever play?
I never did play that. Not one time. Freddie Green used to tell me about that.
And his house in the Bahamas is right on the golf course.
Right.
Right.
Well, you know where you got inspired to do that, don't you?
Was by the house?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know.
How?
When he went down there, when Catherine went down on that junket and she saw, well,
He
this is
came
what
to
I...
Vegas and came by my house.
Yeah.
And he said, you son of a gun, you did it, didn't you? Because my house overlooked the 13th green
Oh, yeah?
and the 14th tee and the 15th fairway going up that way, and the 14th was a water hole, like the 14th going across the water that way.
That's where you live now?
Yeah, and the 5th was coming across the water that way. No, I sold that place.
Oh, yeah.
I sold that and bought a bigger place.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I thought he got the idea. He came, Captain came down on a real estate junket.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And I had bought a lot down there, so they were showing them around. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right across from the Stone Crab. So they were showing him around. They said, this lot over here, well, you probably wouldn't know him, but it belongs to a jazz musician named Clark Terry. Captain said, who? So next week she went back down there and they were having a sale. They were trying to, Pendling was putting out all of the undesirable characters.
Yeah, Finley. Yeah.
Pendling. So
Pendling.
all of,
Yeah.
So
Prime
all of the undesirables had congregated there. They were going to make that the dope center of the world. And they had this big fellow by the name of Skiboo, who was like an animal. He could pick up this table with one hand and throw it through the window, you know. And when they found out that this was about to happen, Pendling put all of them off the island. And they had to sell whatever they had or allow some Bahamian to have 51% control. So this guy had just built this beautiful house down there with gold doorknobs and about 8 bedrooms and so forth, with a small swimming pool right on the golf course. And that's when the captain saw this house. He said, that's it.
Yeah.
So he bought it for a steal.
No kidding.
The house for a steal.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, absolutely.
He told me later on, he said,
Yeah.
I got one too, you know.
Yeah.
I said, oh, yeah? Okay. He's so beautiful, man.
Yeah.
He was so special. You know what I loved about him, what I learned from him? He sit there at that piano, and the orchestra's here, and the orchestra's over here to his left, really. With the bass here, drums up there, and Freddie Green right here, orchestra all right here, and the audience out there. And he'd be playing, you know, and somebody'd make a Stone Louie.
Yeah.
Somebody with,
He could hear.
you know, and Marshall smiled, and Basie, you know, said, "Hey, how you doing, man? Good to see you." Yeah, thanks. He never heard it, never point, you know, he never looked to see who had made the mistake, and I loved that. I figured, I said, yeah, I'd watch him do that every time. He never saw anybody make a mistake, but he heard when then you contributed something that was unusual and when it was good.
Yeah.
And you learn from that. I mean, that like, with life, it goes with the good. I mean, always outweighs the the bad.
We had a tune that we played, and on the end of it, it went like, do, 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 do. Well, Sweet misread it on one particular case. But do, 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 do. What? Sweet hit the note. Everybody was too. So Basie loved it. He said, keep that in. Keep that in, Diddle.
I know he cracked up. He laughed.
He can't. Ever since, every time we play, do, 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 do. What? So he used to stand up and take his big solo. But I tell you about this cat, about Basie. Although Ellington was more endowed with harmony and theory and so forth, Basie was the king of mother wit as far as tempo. And he taught us all the greatest lesson in the world, and that is the utilization of space and time. All the musicians in the world. And they say he learned it through the medium of his socializing at Kansas City in the Cherry Blossom, those little places where he would have people sit, small room like this, but every table had gingham tablecloth, and he'd play a little bit with Joe Jones and Big and Walter Page and the Freddie or the fiddler, whoever was there. And he'd play a little bit, and he'd go socialize. Ding, ding, go over and socialize. Yeah, baby, how you doing, sir? Bing, ding, go over here and have another taste over here and have 2 or 3 tastes in a row. Meanwhile, Joe Jones and Big and still go bing, boom, boom, and he come back, blim, be-doo, so forth and so on. So he was so endowed with rhythm and utilization of space and time, so he knew exactly the way a tune should be before you played it. Now, the best example is that when Neil Hefti was writing for the band, he brought in a tune and passed it out, and Basie played it, so he basically shook his head. He said, "What's the matter? You don't like the arrangement, Chief?" He said, "Yep." He said, "Well, what's wrong with it?" He said, "Tempo." So he said, "Well, the tune was about here." So he said, "Well, what do you think it should be?" "About here." Well, the tune was cute. Dee do 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 dee do dee. That was the tune. He brought it in. He brought it in to be. He do that do do dee. He do that do that. But Basie heard it. He heard it. Right away he said, here's where it goes. And look at the results. If he had kept it up there, it'd just been another also ran tune.
And you're talking about stealing from himself. I mean, like cute.
Oh yeah. He was the king of the space and time.
Yes, he was.
We learned a lot from him.
Yeah. I remember the first job we played, very first job we played, when I joined the band. We left New York and we went down to Norfolk, Virginia, stopped in Washington, D.C. and got some hot smokes. Hot links,
Tim's hot links.
Yeah, hot links and half smokes.
Yeah, smokes,
And by the theater there, and then continued on down to Howard, then continued on down. And we got there, and that night I looked up, and all this Navy brass was there, and it was the officers' dance.
Yeah.
And the old man sit down at the piano and started noodling. And finally he opened up. And you know what he opened up with? What am I here for? You know?
Yeah.
I said, okay.
Yeah.
Way out.
I don't know if you remember this, Joe, but
Yeah.
several years ago, right after the band had hit its lowest ebb, we were in the Strand Theater with, those days, the Picture got the top billing. Key Largo, Edward G. Robinson, Humphrey Bogart, and Count Basie, and Billie Holiday.
Oh, yeah.
Went down like that. So Basie's band was kind of in bad slump because that's right after we had started back up after the small band.
Yeah.
You
Was
know?
Mexican band too?
No, not at that particular time. Eli, Lucky Thompson was playing.
Oh yeah.
Bernie Peacock, Lucky Thompson, Lamar Wright, that was Mishmash, Booty Wood, and strange type of band. So he was saying and said, I need a alto player and a trombone player. So he'd always come to me when he needs somebody. So I said, okay, I got you. So he's in the steam, you know, in the Strand Theater, they had that big steam thing.
Yeah.
He was in the steam bath with his head out there, so he couldn't hear. So I made the phone call from his dressing room to St. Louis and got Ernie Wilkins. Hey, Ernie, you want to come join Count Basie? Oh, man, don't be kidding me. No, I'm serious. I have to do it in a hurry because when the steam bath goes off, I'm dead, you know. So he says, yeah, okay, yes. I said, well, come get Jimmy. Jimmy, too. He said, yeah, bring Jimmy.
Bring
You come to
trombone
New
player,
York?
too,
Yeah. So he came and went to the little flea bag where I was staying down on 47th Street, and I checked him in. The next day, I told Basie after he come out of the show, I said, Basie, I got your players all in line. They're out on the road right now, but they'll be back tomorrow. I said, yeah, okay. So I brought them in and introduced them backstage at the Strand, and I said to him, this is Ernie Wilkins, this alto player. Ernie never played alto in his life. I borrowed an alto from a church player, and it was all wrapped up in rubber bands and cellophane. But I knew that he read well enough and had good enough sound.
Yeah.
Sitting next to Marshall, he would do good.
Yeah.
So he brought it, so I introduced him to him and to Jimmy. I said, now, this cat here, in case Monday and Boot Whip, what's Boot Whip?
Which one?
The writer. James Monday and the other
Trombone player?
No, we used to call him Boot Whip. We used to...
Harding?
Yeah,
Buster. Yeah, Buster.
I said, in case Buster and
in case Sweet Skills Buster.
Sweets. Yeah, I don't want to say that. But in case Boot Whip and Bill Tuesday, I call Monday Bill Tuesday, in case they get too busy, I said, this cat can write, he can help them out. He said, yeah. So, make a long story short, he said, well, his first assignment was to write something for our new singer. So he will every day, and the band, you remember that? The band catapulted from the lowest ebb back to the top, and it's been there ever since. All because of that one thing that he wrote for you, remember?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
That's a fact, yeah.
That thing, and the other side, too.
Yeah.
Was a comeback that Foster wrote. Foster wrote that.
Boop.
Yeah.
Doop. Yeah.
Everybody's dove from that.
Oh, yeah.
I used to hear commercials.
That's where the side one.
Of course. Yeah.
But I'll never forget that because you put it right back up there. It's been up there ever since.
Yeah, that one lasted. It still is every day I had it.
Yeah.
I do it now.
Yeah.
All right. Clark Terry.
Yes, Joseph?
The man that Ellington said, and Ellington was never wrong, believe me, said it was beyond category. And I'm most grateful to be able to call him friend.
Well, I tell you, Joe, I've had the pleasure of being a friend of yours and very close associate of yours for a long period of time, and I'm looking forward to continuing.
Yes.
So God bless you and stay ahead, and all the best to you.
Every day.
Every day.
Yeah, all right.
More to be had. But if you get 2, 3,